Hey everyone, Reptar here. A new MLBB patch just dropped, and it might have some implications for MPL Philippines Season 8. At this point, we're 23 days away from the start of the season, and we're coming from a meta, or off-season meta, that put a lot of importance into physical and magical armor reduction, because now we know that it can reach as low as -60. So heroes that have natural physical and magic armor reduction, as well as items, rose in popularity. We're thinking about Eudora, although she was already nerfed. We're thinking about the War Axe, that's why Borg Jungle rose in popularity. Harley is really popular as well. Other heroes that can reduce magical armor reduction, such as Sylvana, rose in popularity somewhat. So for this video, we're going to be taking a quick look at the patch notes to see which heroes and which items might be affected in terms of their importance in the upcoming MPL Philippines Season 8 meta.
Okay, so out of the gate, the developers are very open with the whole equipment and penetration adjustments added in the latest version, what I mentioned earlier in our intro. And here in patch 1.5.96, the changes that they applied mostly tried to address that. So we'll start first with Karina, and she still, for me, might not affect the MPL meta as much, but watch out for her again in your rank games, as it's looking like she'll have much better damage output with her second skill. Yes, they nerfed her passive, meaning that you're gonna deal less damage or less extra damage based on the lost HP of the enemy, so from 30% to 11%. Her movement speed increase for skill 1 is just a flat 45% across the board, so she might be a little bit harder to catch in the late game, but just like by a little bit. But the main changes with her damage again is with her skill 2. It has higher base damage and a much higher damage ceiling mid to the late game, since it scales 10% better with magic power as well. So again, might not affect the meta much for the MPL, but just be careful when you see Karina in your ranked games. Now going to Paquito, the biggest change for him is that basic attacks no longer build stacks for his champ stance, but he can build stacks with skills without having to hit a target, and the stack requirement to go into champ stance is now 3 instead of 4. Now, the trade-off for all of this is that Jab, his second skill, was nerfed, and that's also his main source of damage outside of his ultimate. The cooldown is now a second and a half longer, while the damage relies more on physical attack scaling. This makes Paquito rely more on cooldown reduction items, and funnily enough, might even encourage more players to consider rocking him with a killing spree assassin emblem combo that I've been seeing lately, while getting the cooldown reduction bonus from that emblem tree. Now, this change might change the playstyle of Paquito players, but just by a little bit. You're gonna want to play a little bit more carefully to really maximize your combos, and it's easier to build your combos for a better team fight start, because imagine it like this: you can go into a team fight already with 2 stacks of champ stance because you just hit nothing with your skill. You're just gonna have to play a little bit on your cooldown reduction or your cooldown timers, but you'll really also want to build a little bit more sustain, so that during team fights, when your skills are on cooldown, you can live a little bit longer to unleash another combo eventually, because again, you no longer get champ stance stacks from the basic attacks. You're gonna have to really wait on your cooldowns and maximize landing your abilities once your cooldowns are off. Though, despite the assassin emblem killing spree thing I mentioned earlier, I think Festival of Blood still may be the go-to option here, because you will get the sustain from that, a little bit more lifesteal, you'll be able to survive in fights a little bit longer. But in terms of the builds, I don't see it changing that much. There might be some Paquito players who'll consider getting Hunter Strike for a little bit more cooldown reduction and damage, maybe if they go for the assassin emblem route, but I still see items like War Axe, Bloodlust Axe, Brute Force Breastplate as being like the main go-to items for Paquito. Hey, magic chest. Now for Phoveus, the changes to Phoveus actually came as a bit of a surprise to me. Getting buffed across the board, shorter cooldown with skill 1 with Malefic Terror, and his ultimate should hurt way more now if you look at the values on the screen. Now, the base damage was around 220 to 320 of an increase, depending on when you're in the early to the late game, how many levels you have on the ability. 30% more magic power bonus. WoW, so he's supposed to scale better once he gets more items in, and he even gets more movement speed when he casts his ultimate. Will this make him more of a usual pick looking at the stats? I don't think so, but I think players or teams may still try to consider experimenting around him, adding him into the slot, because the damage does hurt way more now and he's really tanky. He might end up becoming the new Esmeralda, considering how Esmeralda now in this meta, actually teams would want to get Esmeralda if they feel like they counter, if not two, like at least, and we're talking about at the least 3 heroes that Esmeralda can counter in the enemy lineup before they draft her. So he might end up becoming the new Esmeralda in a way. Although they're not really the same kits. They base it off of hitting and then building their shields with the ultimate. Yeah, sure. But I still don't think Phoveus is going to be a pick that teams are going to be looking at as much. Niche, yes. Go-to, no. Also, because one of the biggest trade-offs for Phoveus is that organized pro teams really understand how his ultimate works. And you can watch previous Phoveus games and see teams really adjusting their positioning and approach to team fights so that Phoveus, or the enemy Phoveus, will end up in a more dangerous position diving too deep, especially if he accidentally hits the wrong target with the ultimate. Long story short, Phoveus maybe, but not most likely. Alright, let's go into Popol Kupa, and hands down, they are still one of the best position 5 roam picks you can choose, and the proceed the same way. His trap has a little bit more cooldown, but the devs said they wanted PNK to sustain better without their teammates. They nerfed the amount of HP Kupa gets from Popol by like 10%, or exactly 10% as it says here, yeah. But they increased the physical attack bonus that adjusts the shield value for the second skill by 40%, while decreasing the knockup time by like 0.2 seconds. So if you build more physical attack items on Popol Kupa, when you use Kupa help, the second skill, I think yeah, not necessarily empowered by alpha form, you get a little bit more shield out of that. I don't think this will really change Popol's position in the meta. Funnily enough, since they might scale better in the late game with the changes that I mentioned, and it might really encourage the PNK avarice second or third item Demon Hunter sword build that we see sometimes, so you get better shield values for Kupa help. I think that might just what happened for Popol Kupa. Definitely still one of the strongest picks that we might see rocking the proceed. We're gonna go pass through all of this and we'll just go straight to Lunox. Lunox rose in popularity for the legend up until the mythical glory ranks, and she was one of the mages that really benefited from the whole value adjustment for magic defense and magic penetration. I think a lot of people who's had a bad history with going up against Lunox will be happy about the changes, because she gets much less magic penetration conversion from cooldown reduction and less defense converted from cooldown reduction. Long story short, this should make her a little bit easier to deal with, but in the hands of really good players should still be something to be careful against. I still think she'll be an option for the pro teams and will be respected in the hands of a pro who comfort picks Lunox. Now, for Luo Yi, the devs were very clear with their intention for this hero. They nerfed the early game damage she deals, but to adjust it, they made it scale a little bit better in the late game. They also decreased the cooldown of her ultimate by like 10 seconds across the board and slightly increased its range. Usually Luo Yi is picked with a good invading tank such as Grok to maximize the chance of stealing a buff away or punishing the enemy jungler early. It's going to be a little bit, and like super little bit easier to deal with and not as punishing, but you'll still want to watch out for the duality combo damage in the game. She's okay, we won't lose her in the meta. Luo Yi is just fine. Now let's look at Harley. Only one change, and I feel like this was much needed. But the question is it really that big of a change? Because items such as Genius Wand weren't adjusted so much. Now, I've been hearing a lot of noise with Harley from the pros, and in their hands is an insane pick in the offseason. 5 less stacks of the magic defense reduction from the Magic Master passive, which is what is adjusted here, just means that the magic defense reduction maximum that Harley can dish out will cap at 20 instead of 30. 30, that's insane, since it's 2 per stack. He'll still be a pick to watch out for, and definitely you still don't want to give him a good early game, but as someone who's been destroyed by really good Harleys in ranked games, yeah, I'm happy with this. But I still don't think this won't change much for Harley's priority in the meta. Okay, now going down to Eve, it's mainly just to adjust her shield from her ultimate and then the immobilizing effect duration. It's just a little bit shorter now. And for her shield, she gets less shield when she uses her ultimate, so Eve players have to be more careful with their positioning. Considering now you have picks like Borg, Saber, and even Khalid by some pros, is getting considered more as a high priority XP laner pick. Again, as I mentioned, the immobilize effect lasts a little shorter, so this should make her just a little bit easier to deal with. But let's be honest, since her entire kit is just so good at controlling and makes her team difficult to go up against during objective takes, Eve should still be fine. Now on to Mathilda. The buffs to Mathilda were quite a surprise, honestly, and it looks like she may rise in popularity even more as a pick in the mid lane position 4 support role, and potentially even the gold lane, potentially. Her enhanced basic attack does 40 more damage. Base damage of Soul Bloom early was nerfed, but the late game still a bit better. Look at that, scales a little bit better in the late. And she now gets 100% magic power bonus for damage, meaning the more items she has for magic power, the better she is. And the decay of Soul Bloom as well. The Soul Bloom decay damage to the same target is now 10% less, because before, or currently, the more you hit the same target with your first skill fully charged up, it deals less damage. But now that it's just a flat 35%, means that it should scale also a little bit better into the late game. Will she be completely gone as a roam pick? I don't think so. But now you don't want to go up against a quick snowball Mathilda, who may want to build a damage item as their third main item if they went the roam role. And teams may consider her more now for the other lanes and roles. So, ouch. But also, I'm really looking forward to how the pros might play Mathilda differently, or if not, still good. Okay, now going on to Balmond. Cooldown reductions, but yeah, just watch out for him. Not a game-changing adjustment at all, but just watch out. You'll be hit by Cyclone Sweep and Lethal Counter a little bit more often. Maybe it's because I have a slight bias with Balmond, as he was my first ever comfort pick when I started playing MLBB like 3 or 4 years ago. Oh yeah, 3 years ago. But I do hope more teams consider picking him up. Benedetta, I don't care, because come on, as long as her kit remains the same, she will have a place in the meta. She has less HP, slightly less defense, but in the hands of pro players, Benedetta is a whole nother level. Maybe they'll just play a little carefully, but I honestly don't see any pro player changing their Benedetta playstyle so much. They're that good with this beast of a hero. Borg as well. Base damage for fire missiles, a little bit lower, like 15 points, but War Axe is still there, and 15 less damage in the earlier portions of the game isn't so bad. Again, maybe might be a little bit easier to deal with, but come on, Borg is still a fantastic pick as long as the War Axe item exists in its current state. Okay, we're gonna go through Zhask real quick, and this was surprising. More survivability on the enhanced Nightmaric spawn since the HP was increased by like 500 or so. Teams might consider him, but I think similar to Season 7, he'll be a very, very niche pick. But teams will have to be careful and keep in mind of that 500 HP Nightmaric spawn increase, because it might make the Nightmaric spawn even more difficult to take down. So I'm gonna look for Zhask a little bit more in MPL Season 8, but again, I think it'll be a minority who decide to add him into the drafting rotation. Gloo, their HP regen per second when split apart goes down by like 1%. That's it. Gloo is in this awkward state. Not awkward, but you might want to draft a little bit more carefully if you're thinking of picking up Gloo, and I think this is what the teams might look out for. At this point, it's well understood that Phoveus is actually a pretty darn good pick against the Gloo, because his Ghost Burster's second skill has like a lightning truncheon effect, and it doesn't even have a limit as to how many times it will like echo the skill with more targets who get hit by it. So you can easily burst down the little baby mini glues. Then naturally glue or heroes that have good AoE damage and can spam it and get heals from it. And I'm thinking of Alpha and Paquito here do relatively well against the glue. So considering this slight HP regen reduction, I still see glue as having a spot in the meta, don't get me wrong, but it might be a little bit trickier now with drafting him in, like, well. Alright, now we're gonna take a look at the magic and physical penetration items that have really helped define the current meta before this patch. And honestly, like, look at the numbers. Okay, War Axe 55 to 45. Okay, 10 less damage. That's fine. Attributes of each stack of effect. 8 physical attack and plus 4 physical penetration it was that before, but now it's 9 physical attack and 3 physical penetration. And the stacked effects granted to marksmen, mages, and supports have been halved or reduced to 33%. So again, this still is one of the best items for like fighter melee types, but I honestly don't see this as that big of an adjustment to a War Axe. It will be better to go up against, but it's still a really fantastic item with the current top picks that we have in the game. And then looking at Malefic Roar as well, 5% less physical penetration sounds good. 5% is, as it goes into the late game, is a big amount, but again, with the values being able to reach negative, I still don't see this as a substantial change. Similar to Genius Wand, 3 to 10 is now 2 to 9. That's 1 point. Divine Glaive, just 5% as well. So honestly, it's still pretty much the same in terms of the really powerful items that we have in Divine Glaive, Genius Wand, Malefic Roar, and War Axe. Overall,
I don't think this is gonna change much, really. Yes, the developers understand clearly that they needed to address the capability of heroes with natural physical and magical armor reduction capabilities. The strength of items such as Malefic Roar, Divine Glaive, Genius Wand needed to be addressed, and they did. And I feel like what this patch did was balance it more than actually nerf it to the ground that teams will have to completely change how they're going to be playing. This is still how I expect MPL Philippines Season 8, or at least the first week of it, might go. Again, it's 23 days, a lot can change. Nathan is going to be available by the time MPL Philippines Season 8 starts. There might be other changes as well coming in the next few weeks. But as of now, with this patch, nothing much changes. Just a few adjustments here and there. What do you think? Comment it down below. And if you like this video, don't forget to like, share it, and also subscribe to my channel. More videos like this are going to be coming up throughout the season. Again, my name is Reptar. I'll see you on the next one.